Megan had always loved old houses. Their creaks and groans seemed full of history, stories waiting to be uncovered. So when she and her husband Dave found a charming century-old cottage in the woods, they couldn't resist. It was everything they wanted: secluded, quiet, and full of character. The house had been abandoned for years, and the realtor warned them about the oddities, but Megan was certain it was just her overactive imagination. After all, old houses were bound to have a few quirks, right? On their first night there, after unpacking, they settled into their new bedroom. The house felt cold, and Megan noticed a strange chill in the air, but she shrugged it off. The heat would kick in soon. It wasn't until after midnight that Megan heard it. The soft, scratching sound. It was faint, almost like something small moving inside the walls. She paused, listening intently. The sound continued, dragging across the plaster. With a rhythmic, deliberate motion. "Dave, do you hear that?" she whispered. Dave stirred beside her but didn't respond. He was already fast asleep, oblivious to the noise. Megan tried to ignore it, but the scratching only grew louder, closer. It was as though something was moving just behind the walls, scratching and tapping in a steady pattern, like a heartbeat from within the house itself. She sat up in bed, the blankets clutched tightly around her. The house was old, sure, but this felt wrong. It wasn't just the walls creaking. The noise was too intentional. When the scratching stopped, she almost felt a sense of relief. But then she heard it. A low whispering, her breath caught. She couldn't understand the words, but it was a voice coming from the walls. "Get out!" Megan's heart began to race. She quickly shook Dave awake. "Dave, wake up!" He groggily opened his eyes, confused. "What's wrong?" "Do you hear that? The scratching, the voice." He looked at her, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Megan, you're just tired. Relax." But Megan knew something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in this house. She got up and crept to the door, listening carefully. The whispering was softer now, but it was still there. She walked down the hallway, the creaking of the floorboards under her feet seeming impossibly loud in the silence. The house seemed to be alive with strange noises, whispers from behind. The walls, faint scuffling in the attic, doors creaking open and shut when no one was near. Finally, she made her way to the basement door, where the scratching was the loudest. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Swallowing her fear, Megan stepped down into the basement. It was cold, unnaturally cold. The air thick and damp with the smell of old wood and mold. The low light from her phone barely cut through. The gloom. Then she saw it. A hole in the wall. It wasn't big, just large enough for a person to crawl through if they were small enough. The hole was jagged and deep, as if something had been scraping against it from the other side. Megan's stomach churned. She reached out to touch the wall around the hole, her fingers trembling. As soon as she did, the scratching began again, faster, frantic, as though something was trying to escape. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned to run, but then something moved in the shadows. A figure, a tall, thin figure with wide eyes and an open mouth. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. It reached out with skeletal hands, fingers long and crooked, and grabbed her wrist with a grip like ice. Megan screamed and yanked her arm free, stumbling backward. The figure didn't follow, but it laughed, a dry, raspy sound that echoed in the basement. She ran up the stairs, but when she reached the top, the door slammed shut in front of her. The whispers intensified, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Her heart raced and she pounded on the door, screaming for Dave. Finally, the door creaked open. She stumbled into the bedroom, panting and covered in cold sweat. Dave sat, up in bed, eyes wide. "What's going on?" Megan didn't say anything at first. She just pointed to the wall. The scratching was back. It was louder than ever. The walls were pulsing, as if something was trying to break through. The floor beneath their feet seemed to shake, and then silence. Megan turned around to face Dave, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on something behind her. "Dave?" He didn't respond. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, as if frozen in place. Megan turned slowly, heart in her throat. Behind her, in the dark corner of the room, the figure stood, the same tall, thin figure. It was smiling. The next morning, when the police arrived, they found the house abandoned. Megan and Dave were gone. All that remained was a strange, deep hole in the wall of the basement, as if something had clawed its way out. No one ever found them. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, people swear they hear the scratching again. Oh, Minnie.